What's up, everybody? Tanner Larsson here, and welcome back to the Optimized Ecommerce Podcast. Super excited to have you guys join us and to talk about today's episode. I love this stuff, right? Like it's all optimization, all ecom, all the time. And today we are joined by a special guest and a repeat guest from the BGS team, Eric Kwoka. And Eric is going to be rocking out with the most exciting topic you've ever heard of, A/B testing. Right now, some of you guys are like, oh my God, that's so boring. But I promise you, when you actually get into A/B testing and learn what it can do and the wins and the money it can make your store, it becomes quite a sexy topic. So we're going to get down and dirty with the A/B testing type stuff. And then Eric's also going to be showing you some existing and new wins and tests that we've run and results and what's happened there. So Eric, thanks for being on.
I'm always happy to be here.
Yeah, and you gotta, Eric's this, like, if we had to pick one person on the BGS team who is like the brainiac of the brainiac when it comes to this stuff, that would be Eric. He's basically become a walking encyclopedia of all things optimization and testing and user experience and all of that. So really excited to have him, share what's in his head, because he's always educating us on the team with all the new stuff that he's coming up with. So very excited for that. So Eric, why don't we just jump into this a little bit? We don't really need to intro you, I guess, because they all know you, and if they don't, listen to another episode. Eric has been a part of the team for a long time. He runs a part of our Amplified Partnership Program, working with our Amplified stores, and is literally in the trenches doing testing and optimization and tweaking on these stores every single day. Works with stores in the US, works with international stores, does all of it. But Eric, let's go ahead and just jump into what is A/B testing, and how can someone understand what it is and why they would want to do it?
Yeah, so the basic idea of A/B testing is just having, as users come to your site, they get one version of something, like the A version or the B version, normally of like a single piece of the page. So they get one or the other, and you kind of see through your analytics whether that actually has a change on the user behavior. For example, if, say on the product page, you have those little buy it now, like PayPal buttons, like you have that on one and you don't on the other. And then you see over, hundreds or thousands, tens of thousands of users, whether this actually translates into differences in conversion rate, add to carts, email signups, and overall, at the end of the day, revenue as like that North Star thing. But the main important detail of this is that it is happening like at the same time, where you have, users, literally sitting next to each other that go to the store could end up seeing different versions in these small differences. And that over time, helps to smooth out any of those issues that might arise if you're just doing you look at the data, make a change, and then look again, because you don't know what else is going on in the world. If you have your new version happens, on Black Friday, obviously it's going to do better than whatever you had before, but it has nothing to do with what you actually made the change. So the benefits with A/B testing is that these are all happening at the same time. So even if it runs over Black Friday, theoretically, each side is getting that effect like equally.
And guys, if you're thinking like, how does this work? Well, you're using a piece of software or a script or something that's basically using a rotator to rotate based like every other person, or 50% or whatever percentage you set the split test to. It will rotate the view. So visitor number 1 sees A, visitor number 2 sees B, visitor number 3 sees A, visitor number 4 sees B, and it kind of goes back and forth like that. That's the very basic version of how it operates. So it is a bit geeky, but it's also super powerful in that it's the only real way to know if something's winning or outperforming something else. Now, Eric, why don't you talk a little bit about we'll talk about how to do it in a second, but like how you need to limit what you're testing, your variables, because I think that's something people get confused on.
Absolutely. Like tests should ideally be like what is essentially like a single change. We'll kind of get into this a bit later with some of the example tests that I have. But you want to try to have something that is pretty impactful, especially if you have lower traffic. You want to have something that's big, that's most likely to be seen, most likely to have an impact. And ideally as, atomic in a sense, like that it's just a single thing on the page, that you're not changing up a bunch of random things that may not be even connected in a way, because then your data is going to be all over the place and you'll have no idea what thing is contributing in which direction. But a big thing is when stores, because I know a lot of our listeners are probably small stores as well as possibly some bigger ones. As you grow in size, it really changes also like what you're able to do with your testing, as well as, you know, what your kind of main focus is with the testing. Like when you're a small store, a lot of your testing is gonna be just on like being risk averse. Like you're just, you know, you read a blog post, you listened to a podcast and they said, oh, hey, do this to your store. And you're kind of like, I'm not so sure on that. You might do a test on that instead of just straight implementing it, just to kind of make sure you're moving in the right direction. Because you're going to have low traffic, so tests are going to take a long time, and you're not necessarily going to be able to do super great science. You can kind of double check that something isn't hurting you, as opposed to just like, you know, implementing stuff, which can be great if the source is good, but you don't know which of those things might be actually helpful in the long run.
And, you know, contrary to a lot, what's kind of like a layman's or popular opinion about A/B testing, it's not about testing two completely different pages. Like if you have a product page layout, you don't necessarily, typically you're not testing a completely different layout. You're changing one element on the existing page. I hear a lot of people talking about split testing, like, okay, I'm going to whip up a completely different page to test. The problem is you don't know, when you do something like that, you don't know what on that different page is actually working or whatever. You can do different layout tests, but those are not your typical A/B tests. All right. So don't get in this mindset of you have to like come up with a completely new page design or a completely new thing to test. We're just literally, if on your product page, you might test adding a size wizard, like a wizard that walks them through that. That could be the test between just your static image based versus a wizard. That's one icon that we're changing or one thing, or you're testing a new product title or something along those lines. The nitty gritty of it could be button testing, like testing button colors, but we don't recommend that unless your store has massively high traffic and you've tested everything else under the sun first.
Yeah. If you're Amazon, you can test a button and probably get a good result in like an hour, but most stores are, it's never going to be meaningful. Like so long as your buttons stand out, whether it's blue or red, probably not going to be making a huge difference.
Yep. Cool. So in terms of why, is there anything else you want to touch on and why they should be using? I know we covered some of it already, but is there anything else you want to touch on that?
Well, just the main thing. So I mentioned smaller stores, it's about risk aversion, just kind of double checking some of those things that you might have implemented otherwise, but you just kind of want to run some of them through something to kind of see, you know, instead of just assuming that it's going to work, kind of knowing that it does or doesn't. Kind of, you know, sometimes it's just gut checking yourself where you think this idea is so fantastic and amazing, and then you test and you're like, oh, not quite what I was expecting. But then as you get bigger and have more traffic, you can start doing more like fine tuning and optimization. And when you get into super big stores, you get into like automation and personalization and all of those different factors where you really start, you know, really micro adjusting the experience. And at the huge level, it's into major rethinks where you can test larger things. But the main thing is just about being able to be making changes to your store that aren't just following a fad or, you know, somebody said to do this, so I'm going to do it, and kind of making it so that you're making more data informed decisions. So, you know, this thing is actually, you know, getting more users to buy as opposed to just, you know, it's the hot thing.
And if you think about it, guys, a lot of times you'll have like 4 things you do to your site. Well, let's say you add 4 things to your site. Let's make 4 changes. And let's say 3 of them actually give you a lift, but one of them gives you takes away from your lift and actually hurts you enough that it negates those other 3. So you would think those 4 things made no impact, but you have no idea that one change you made is actually causing a problem. So that's where the A/B testing comes in, because you can test one element at a time, right? And then figure out what's actually winning. Because it happens a lot, guys. Even with us, if we put too many things on a site at one time, we may have something that's hurting us that's negating the gain that we would have had if we had known what was working. So we're very, very, you know, step by step, and we use a lot of testing to figure this out so that we don't make those mistakes. Because a lot of times you just don't know. And honestly, I mean, Eric, wouldn't you say that our gut is usually wrong when we do the test. A lot of times, things we think are going to win don't win.
Yeah, there's definitely a few where it's just like you're like, this is a sure thing, but we'll just test it anyway. And then, you're just like, you go back and you're just like, what happened? What could have gone wrong? What do I have to change about my whole belief system to make this fit in now?
Cool. So, A/B testing is a scary subject. So how can the average person, or even not the average person, how can people get started with it without having to go, become a data geek?
Yeah, so right now, the best tool, especially for getting started, is Google Optimized. It's free. It links in with your Google Analytics, and the editor and stuff is pretty good. Like that, you can get actually a lot of kind of those entry-level tests done without having any coding knowledge at all, as long as you can get through its very simple guide for installing it to your store. Then everything actually works pretty quick and easily from there. And it does do a lot to simplify some of the statistics that come out the other end. It doesn't do the most powerful job of really explaining the intricate details of the results that you're getting, but unless you're super into you know making your own spreadsheets and formulas and stuff, then it'll get you most of the way there, especially when you're just getting started and you're not necessarily having a bunch of energy and resources that you can put towards a serious testing program. It can at least give you some of that, the 80-20, that simple 20% that will get you most of the results.
And guys, we use heavier duty testing platforms like convert.com and some of the other, tools out there that are super, heavy duty, but we also use Google Optimize in a lot of our stores because for a lot of the testing that needs to be done, it's completely acceptable and it provides great stuff, and it's way easier to use and a hell of a lot more affordable since it's free, right? So we use a mix of different platforms and testing tools, but for sure, Google Optimize is where you should start. Absolutely. And they're trained on, it's pretty good. But on top of that, Eric is actually in the process of finishing up a Google Optimize course that we're going to release on how to use Google Optimize specifically for e-commerce stores so that everybody can test the way that Eric does and the way that our team does. And that'll be something that we'll be releasing as soon as he's got that finished. So that'll be available to our e-com insiders for free. It'll also be available for sale if someone just wants to buy that course and they're not an e-com insider. So if that's something you want, I highly recommend you look at that if you want to get into user testing, because the one downside I'll give about any kind of Google Analytics or Google tool or whatever is when they teach you how to use it, they're teaching the generic, the web process that would work for any store or whatever. Like Google Analytics, they teach you how to install it on a website, but it's not specific to a store, right? Whereas what Eric is going to be putting together in this course and has done is how do we use it specifically on e-com stores, and how do we test specifically for e-com, because there are nuances that are different from other platforms and other types of sites.
It's actually even worse than that, in that Google's official on their YouTube channel optimized little lessons on it are totally awful. You will be going in the totally wrong direction. They don't teach you how to install it correctly. They show tests that logically don't make any sense. They don't work, even what they demonstrate how to do. I'm not sure who wrote that stuff, but when I was even getting more familiar with it, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. But hopefully our thing can help solve that. And it's designed in a way where we take you through tests, start to finish, simple ones, when you're really just getting started, and when maybe you don't have a lot of traffic or a lot of, statistical knowledge or coding stuff, and then more intricate stuff as it goes up. So it's built in that kind of layered, like a cake, like a beautiful A/B testing cake.
Awesome. All right. So guys, not a pitch to the program or anything, but if you are using Google Optimize and you'd like to get the most out of it, that course will be released very, very soon. So check the BGS website, or if you're an insider, just log into the members area, it'll be there. Moving on from that though, Eric, why don't we start showing some examples? Because this will help kind of drive it home for people and why it's important. And, also everybody always loves test results because you're like, ooh, they figured it out. I can go do that.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, I have a selection of 5 tests here from, I don't have screenshots and stuff because I didn't have the time to get that cleared with clients and stuff, but we'll go through, I'll describe everything, go over the data on how why we made the decisions that we did and how we chose to analyze it. So you can kind of understand the thought process that goes into a test, as well as enjoying some of these interesting test results. So the first one I've got, this was one that I actually ran on one of the stores that I manage. And this is the express checkout buttons in the Shopify checkout. Because Shopify has been, I think by now they've totally rolled it out that you can't suppress these without having Shopify Plus. But in the past, this really worked well in our own app that then Shopify stopped us from being able to use. And then we found another way, and then Shopify stopped that way. But I was able to get in, and before that happened, do a nice test to see how it went through. Yeah, so this was common practice for us, as well as some widespread usability testing pointed out that these express checkout buttons can be a bit distracting on that first step of the checkout when people are just putting in their shipping information, as well as it can take away from getting people to submit their email for marketing that don't then finish the checkout. Because if you start into that PayPal, the PayPal express checkout thing, and you start putting in your information, but then you stop, the store gets nothing. If you as a store owner, you don't get their email or anything to follow up, well, at least if they do that first step in the Shopify checkout, you might have their email to be able to go. Mm-hmm. So these are the kind of ideas of why is this maybe important to get done? So anyway, as we went through and we did this test, it ran for quite a while. And we found that in terms of the actual effect on revenue, it was basically just nothing. It didn't really affect it at all, interestingly enough. Because a lot of people say, oh, you need to have these because people use them. They just want to buy with their Apple checkout, Google Pay. We found customers were, still getting through pretty much equally. The difference is so small that, you can't even say that there is a difference. The coin toss, really. Mm-hmm. So that was extremely surprising for me. And, well, I would have expected it to do something, either distract people, as a lot of the past stuff had done, or help people get through it faster. And I imagine a lot of this has to do with the changing landscape, because a lot of these things, a few years ago were new. It could be a lot more, mysterious, especially for older audiences, which this store happens to have. But, eventually I would expect that would have been become more and more natural for people to do. And maybe we're kind of at that tipping point. But what was especially interesting here was that the effect on email captures was the opposite. So we would have expected that people going through PayPal and those things, because it's actually more difficult to get the emails that way, at least from a peer, at least that we expected from the UX standpoint. But it turned out that, individuals that went through those or had those express checkout buttons were significantly more likely to actually have signed up for emails, marketing emails, by the time that they got through the whole process. So that was especially surprising. Now, because of the nature of this was not on a Shopify Plus store, so we didn't get to really dive into the full event tracking, but that was pretty significant and not a way that I had expected, or how it went, really went against some of the knowledge that we had expected to have true. And, you test those sacred cows and you find out that they're just not so anymore.
Or more on a case-by-case basis, as well as to whether they're store-by-store basis.
Yeah. And it ended up actually being a 10% difference in email captures. And for this specific store, that translates into about 60 pounds per 100 customers to actually buy, based on projecting that into the future, because it's a fairly low normal cart value store. So that's just this difference of, had we not had the buttons, adding them would get us this kind of a value. Unfortunately, well, luckily Shopify is making us do that anyway. So, that kind of kicked that off.
Cool. Yeah. And that's a perfect example of a test that we would have assumed would never win.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what else you
got? So the next one is, this was a collection of changes on the product page. This is for a product that's a natural therapeutic jewelry product. and kind of just doing some a small actually list of changes. So normally you wouldn't want to do multiple changes in a single test, but sometimes depending on traffic or how big these individual things are, you might almost need to lump them together just to make sure that it's like you have an impact. Because if you make a small thing, you might spend 3 weeks testing and it does nothing. But if you test 4 small things together, it's more likely to get an impact that you can see statistically. So in this case, it was primarily about truncating the description and making it so that the description, instead of being the full thing right on the page, which in this store on mobile was many viewports worth of description, instead it would be about 1 viewport of description and then have a read more button that you could expand it out. And what we found in this was actually that getting users to the review section, which was right underneath that description, translated into a 10% boost in revenue for this store.
That's pretty awesome.
It's basically it's like customers like those reviews, and this seemed to show a much better way for them to get there in the first place. And we kind of tie this back to cognitive load issues, that before maybe it was just kind of seeing a bit too much, not knowing what was important to them, kind of scrolling through, getting that scroll fatigue, and then just moving on. While here they get to that review section and they kind of see a bit more of an overview of the product. And if they want that details, they can go in. And what was really good for this store, because that 10% boost was $100,000 over 6 months, if we project that out, just for this simple test of what was essentially, adjusting the description to be a bit smaller for the, as the default position on the page, as well as just adding a size chart link. But that was kind of the smaller thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's also a good example of, it's not all about massive tests or massively changing things. Like the product information was still there. It was just set up in a way that the customer didn't have to view it if they didn't want it right away. And it showed them what they wanted, which was the reviews, faster.
Absolutely. So sometimes just cleaning up that path for users to make it so that they can choose their own adventure, what information do they want when they want it, as opposed to you strictly dictating that, can really help users have that more confidence and not get frustrated with the store.
And that's, another example of that is a type of progressive disclosure. So using tabs or accordions or things like that are similar ways that you can control the display of information at the right time and put it in the user's hands and not forcing them to scroll quite as much. So something you guys can all test as well. All right, Eric, what's the next one?
The next one it's on the same products, these therapeutic necklaces, but it's all about the wizard. Like we've talked, I think there's been a podcast in the past talking about the effect of wizards that can have. In this case, this store already had a wizard, but it was kind of, tucked away somewhere, like, up in a navigation button somewhere that you kind of had to go looking for it. And they were finding that some of the most common landing pages, the collection pages, were the main place that this store was sending traffic to. And some of their top landing pages were actually having the worst overall performance for the store. And it's kind of looked at that as like, maybe people that are coming into the store are just not sure where they want to go. Like when it comes to these kinds of, natural remedy type things, people might not know their way around the landscape or how to even interpret the store right away. So user tests were showing that customers were having trouble differentiating between a lot of the products. Like when we were doing the user testing and they're telling us about their feelings and thoughts as they're going through, that was a thing that came up a lot. And the wizard had been there before, but was not being used very often. But when it was used, people were buying. Like it was a significant boost. Like if somebody had made it to the wizard, they were much more likely to buy. So the change was just adding a small link underneath the collection title, just a small link saying, need help finding your perfect product. And it was just on these top landing pages, the top 5 ones. And this had a rather large boost. So just on mobile alone, this increased revenue by over 11%. This is on a store that was already doing pretty well. Like just in the testing data, the people that were involved in this test on these landing pages, the conversion rate was already over 10% during this period. And then they still got an additional 11%. Like that's huge, really, for a store like that.
Massive. Yeah.
So this translated into 75,000 for this store, just for adding this link that they already had to a wizard. It would have been nice to see the full wizard, because setting up a whole wizard is a bit difficult. But sometimes just once you have it, getting it into the right places can have a very meaningful impact on the customer experience.
Yeah, and I mean that, like you said, a big lift, but also now we've got some information. Hey, putting these links over here, and then like Eric said, maybe the next thing would be nice to show the actual wizard, or build it into those pages. So that could be the next test. It's like, hey, this validated that having this here gave us an 11% boost. What would happen if there was a way to access like the wizard in the page and just fill it out right there? Is that going to give us an even bigger lift? So one test often leads you right to what the next test should be.
Yes, and that is the perfect segue. I almost can't believe you didn't know what I was going to be talking about next. Is the perfect one is because there was a second follow-up test to this, which is a great way. Like when you find tests that have a big impact, even if it's bad, like good or bad, if you make a change and you have a big impact from it, then you know that this is something important. There's something important there to your users. So what's pretty common, like I love to do, is if I have a big impactful test, like do something else in that same area, because we know this is going to have an impact. And you kind of can keep doing that until the difference becomes too small, and you're kind of at like your local maximum for that. So in this case, before it was just on the top 5 landing pages, and they're like, why not put it on all the collections pages? So they went through and just exact same implementation, but now on every other collections page. And the big shocker here is that it was actually the opposite effect. So it found that once it was no longer the major landing pages that people were coming to, but ones that they were already on the site, it then had an actual negative impact. Like it was a loss of 6% to have it on these other pages that were not that main landing page that users were arriving at. So luckily, like they did this test and not just push that out to everything, because it'd be really easy to just be, oh, it was on the 5, let's just throw it on everything else and we'll see that win. But in this case, that started to violate kind of like users' expectations. So once they were on the store and kind of going through things, they might have had more of a lay of the land, and now this link was a distraction. While for people just initially landing that maybe aren't familiar with the products yet, it was very helpful. But once they're there, not as helpful anymore. Yeah,
and that's, again, perfect example of why testing is so important, because it would be especially, or further testing as well, because man, I would have been like, yeah, let's put it on everything, but clearly that doesn't always work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that they did this test, because that could have easily undone most of the work that they had just, gotten through in that last test.
Absolutely, for sure. What else? What's the next one?
So the next one is, this is a health supplement store. So it has actually a really high average order value, because, typically when people are buying supplements, supplements aren't cheap, but also people like to buy, big orders in single goes with these. And in this case, a lot of users were adding stuff to their cart and then abandoning. So normal cart abandonment, like they're having over 50%, which is pretty high. Yeah. Not necessarily extremely high for high order, like high value carts, but certainly higher than you might want it to be. And they were finding that on the cart page, because this is, you add to cart and you get sent to a cart page. Once users were there, pretty much all of our click maps and other kinds of things were just showing that people weren't ready to move forward. So they were clicking, continue shopping and going back to collections and such. So the basic thought is maybe users aren't really ready to go further down the funnel or off to the cart. And, initially it was tests on how can we make the cart better? Because maybe the cart itself is just the problem. And they did some tests in there and it wasn't really resolving this issue. So then this test specifically was, instead of using a cart page, a full cart page, to use the little, we call Ajax cart, or the cart drawer that kind of slides out from the side, where you don't have to go to another page. You're still wherever you were. and it doesn't, fully interrupt your browsing experience. And some interesting parts of this is on this cart drawer, there was no express checkout button like the PayPal button, which was on the cart page and had been winning on the cart page in past tests. And there were no UVPs in this cart drawer, which there were on the cart page, like the little UVP icon saying like, oh, free shipping or our products are yada, 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 those things. So just implementing this cart drawer that just kind of updates as you add stuff in and just kind of slides out, this had an insane impact on the store. Like just on mobile, just mobile revenue was up over 40%, just having the cart drawer instead of the cart page. Wow. And on desktop, it was 100%. There's much lower traffic on desktop, but that's a
massive increase.
Yeah, I can't imagine anybody was expecting that big of a change, like even thinking it was going to be better. And overall, this ended up translating into $250,000 in revenue just over the next 6 months, assuming everything else is the same, which of course, if the store is growing, it becomes bigger and bigger and keeps making money forever.
And those
but in this case,
bigger.
Yeah, so it just snowballs further and further. So just this change was translating to 250,000 in 6 months, which is massive for what is, can seem like such a small conceptual change to the process. The main insight to come away with from that is just like maybe pushing users down the funnel isn't always what they really want to be doing. Because if they're still collecting things up and deciding, imagine being in a store and someone just keeps trying to get you to go over to the checkout. Like after you pick up one thing, the worst experience ever. You never want to go back to that store.
Totally.
And it works just the same here, where the cart drawer was much less interruptive to the customer's experience as compared to a cart page where they have to go through the loading to end up over there and then hit continue shopping and load another page.
And, guys, this test, we still test it on every store, but this is why you hear us saying one of our best practices is to always use a drawer cart or an Ajax cart. It's kind of like one of those things that we typically start off with. Of course, on any of our AMP partner stores, we still test against it because sometimes it doesn't win. And sometimes there's other configurations that we want to use. But obviously 100% increase on desktop and massive increase on mobile as well. And again, but from what Eric's talking about is like a normal process is to push them down the funnel, right? That's what we're kind of trained to do from a direct response standpoint. But what we're learning more and more about from usability is it's the buyer's journey, and it's got to be optimized for the buyer. And it's not just optimized to make money, but optimized in a way that doesn't piss off your customers or potential customers who are coming to come back later or whatever. So you're kind of optimizing multiple levels of this stuff as you're doing it. So, the direct old school direct response principles don't always hold true in this kind of stuff, especially on e-com stores.
Yeah. And this could also easily go the opposite way if it's like, a single product store or things where people just buy the one thing.
Absolutely.
Because, maybe you just show them your small upsell or something, but then otherwise move them down because there isn't much browsing to do. But in terms of health supplements, they have a fairly wide selection and people like to really gather that stuff up. So this really worked for keeping that AOV high for that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Do you have anything else? Or is that, I think that was our last
one. Last one.
One last one? All right, give it away.
One last one. So this is one that, even going in, this actually comes up a bit in the Facebook group too. I know you talked about this even there too. We tested Wheelio against a custom built Klaviyo form. And, like everybody hates these things, the Wheelio, like most people in marketing side, they hate it, but we always just say it works.
Yeah, like
it works.
Cheesy.
It works.
Cheesy makes money, right?
Yeah, we hate it, but it works. And we did get a chance to test this on the store because the client had a few months ago removed Wheelio because they thought it was causing some issues with their Google ads, because Google doesn't necessarily like you having things that pop up right after people come to the store. So we had removed it and built a custom Klaviyo ad that's nice and themed. And then recently it was like, okay, let's revisit Wheelio. Because we think we've got the Google ads thing figured out and it wasn't Wheelio was the problem. So let's revisit Wheelio. And What are my numbers now? Okay, so the big thing, so this is common practice, and like I say, gamification's a great way to do this. And the way that this was set up was that everything else was basically equal. Like the situations in which one of them would be shown was exactly the same, because we did, built our own JavaScript flow that basically said, after 40 seconds, if they haven't seen anything in the last 45 days, like any of these email captures or submitted in anything, they'll see one of these two, but it'll be otherwise same timing and everything else is the same. In terms of revenue, Wheelio had a very small effect in the negative direction. So this was like that first thing, like, okay, interesting, but not enough to where you could really say for sure that it was, causing this problem, or if it was maybe just the random chance, because there is a lot of noise in testing. That's why you have to test for long periods of time and with lots of users. You can't just see the first 10 people that come through the store and be like, oh, this is the winner. So in this case, a bit even, but showing kind of a bit of a negative. But then when we looked at the actual email signups, because this was the main thing that we're looking at for this, when we looked at the email signups, Wheelio had a 90% increase in the signups. So in this case, like that's a very small revenue cost for, if you have good email campaigns going on, like you have emails that work and you're building that list, this was a very easy trade-off to recommend, because it's like what ends up being a very small, kind of potential cost in the revenue, but to get that list growing, and that list translates into money in the long term.
And even more important in today's environment with all the iOS stuff, like, you're not able to target. So it's even more important to grab those emails or push notifications every single way you can, because you got to build a list separately. So 90% increase in list building without a significant or even noticeable difference in income is a win. Like, that's totally worth doing.
Absolutely. Especially if you have good tracking of your lifetime value of those email signups, you can start much more easily measuring that against it. And in this case, lifetime value of just getting a sign up was around, £10, and the cost was going to be, over 6 months, something like less than £5,000. But they're getting twice as many signups. In this case, in 2 weeks, it was another 250 signups, which translates into, in 2 weeks, that could be £3,000, and it's only costing $5,000 over 6 months, assuming that, what we saw was exactly what the impact will be. That's an easy trade-off for most people to make.
Absolutely. And guys, he keeps talking about pounds because this particular store is a UK based store. So it's actually in pounds, not dollars. But it just depends on what the store is to what the currency is. But in this case, he's not talking about weight. He's talking about pounds, like British dollars.
Yeah. So the main insight there is just, even if we think it's dumb and that we just hate it,
and we do, guys, like, I know you do too. Like it's what we hear more than anything. We talk about Wheelio or any of these different gamification, like just Uno, where we mimic the spin or whatever. We think they're cheesy. We think they're ugly. We think they're obnoxious, but they win and they make us a lot of money. So we kind of have to bite our tongue since we're in the game of making money, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Any last thoughts on testing you want to share with anybody before we wrap up?
Just that, if you haven't done any testing, just get in there, test something simple. One of the best, first test that you can do is just on your main landing page, like where you're sending your traffic to, change your headline. Like it's just like when you're doing your ads, like changing that main text is going to be the most impactful thing for you to really look at, or the image in that case. So like just, go to your landing pages, change your headlines, change your banners, and, test them against different things. And that's where, even if you're a fairly small store, you're pretty likely to, see an impact from.
Yep. And for other ideas on testing, guys, you could take any of the ones that Eric just talked about here. You could go to any of our other podcasts or anything where we're talking about results. And if you hear us talk about a test or a thing we did or an optimization, oh, I like that. Cool. don't just take our word for it. Go run it as a test, right? So, and that way, I mean, honestly, that's what most of our ecom insiders do. We give them the information and then they go and test based on that. Like sometimes they don't test it, sometimes they just take it, but they're not having to generate the ideas for what to test. We're giving them, hey, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. And the thing is if it doesn't work on the supplement store we tested it on, that doesn't mean it's a losing test. We're going to run that test more than likely across every other site in our network because sites are contextual. Just because it didn't work here doesn't mean it's not going to work on other sites. Also, just because it does work on this site doesn't mean it's going to work on other sites. So we want to test it across as many different platforms as we can to give you guys the best information. But you need to test it yourself as well. There's no way to get around that.
Yep, absolutely. Like as much as we'd love to say that we're always right and what we tell you to do to your store is going to just make you super rich, we know some of it isn't going to work on every single store that's out there. And definitely sanity check us, tell us where we're wrong. But if you have the data, we're happy to be wrong as long as we're learning. And
absolutely. And it's kind of a collective thing. That's why again, I keep talking about Ecom Insert, but why it's so powerful, because within our amplified program, we're taking a test and we're running it across, 20 plus different 7 and 8 figure stores, which is great. But then we take that same data and we roll that data out to our ecom insiders. There's 500 of them, and they're testing it across 500 more stores, different niches, different industries, different everything. So that group has the data of, hey, this optimization works 96% of the time across any store, or this works great on supplements, this one works great on POD, but not on supplements, or this works great with audiences between this age and this age. And that's what really makes BGS so powerful, is we have that community and we have the volume of stores to test all this stuff across multiple things. So, when we say it's a best practice, it's because it wins most of the time. But again, we still test everything. It's always contextual, because every site, Eric could have a POD nurses site, and I have a POD nurses site. The test wins on his site. It could lose on my site. It's just, you have to test it. And what Eric showed you today, and with using Google Optimize and following Eric's course on Google Optimize, it'll be super easy for you to do that, and always make sure that what you're putting on the site is helping. And if it's not helping, it, so you can take it off and try something else.
Absolutely. And it can get really easy to be like, oh, all these apps are going to make me more money. And you can't ever trust the app's own dashboard, because it's going to take credit for everything. Just like many people see with Facebook, where it's like, oh no, it wasn't really Facebook that got me that purchase. It was the email that I sent. But Facebook's just like, all me.
Yep. And any app that reports sales, we've seen it. We've seen the back ends of them. We know how they work. You'll have Klaviyo, you'll have your SMS one, you'll have your Facebook Messenger, you'll have your add to cart, you'll have all these apps claiming the same sale. So you got to be, that's why the testing is so important, to know where it actually came from and what's actually making the impact. But guys, right now, I don't want to keep this going any longer. Check out Google Optimize. It's free, great way to start. If you need help with that, then check out the course that Eric is going to be releasing on the BGS site very soon. If you're an ecom insider, again, you'll have access to it as soon as it's released. And to get the show notes on this podcast and hear the test results again or whatever, go to buildgrowscale.com/podcast. Also, if you're not subscribed, you can get all the links to subscribe on your favorite platform there. And with that, we will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. See ya.